But first, a scene of horror and carnage in the Tasmanian town of Port Arthur tonight, where as many as 25 people have been shot dead in Australia's worst massacre. At least 15 people are wounded, and the gunman, who's still holding police at bay, is thought to be holding at least one person hostage. Most of the victims are reported to be tourists visiting the historic penal colony at Port Arthur.
What do you understand he may have done?
Kill lots of people.
Any idea why?
No, no idea.
Any idea who he was?
No idea. Not a local, I don't think.
But he was a local. Martin Bryant murdered 35 people and injured 21 others in a killing spree in Tasmania in 1996. He's currently in Hobart's Rysden prison serving 35 life sentences. His Port Arthur rampage is one of the deadliest of the 20th century. 13 years on, two Fairfax journalists have written a book exploring what lessons can be learnt from this appalling massacre.
There's been a lot of talk, a lot of argument that we should forget Martin Bryant, that the terrible things that happened 13 years ago ought to be forgotten and, locked away. In fact, we have a great lesson to learn from Bryant, because as we saw with Virginia Tech, with Columbine, with Germany just recently, with Dunblane, these are not isolated incidents, and the signposts are there in all these people early on as children.
It was clear as a child Bryant was distant and unemotional. He was sometimes violent and suffered severe bullying by other children. So was it part of his genetic makeup for him to do what he did? Was he a born or bred killer?
I think it's a combination. That's the point. I think that science had argued previously that it was you were born, or nature versus nurture is the more common title, and I think that Bryant shows emphatically that the answer is a combination. How it mixes together, that volatile mix which explodes, is questionable.
That combination consisted of a violent heritage. His great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother were both shipped to Tasmania from Britain as convicts. As a toddler, his mother, unable to control his energy, used to leash him to their balcony. As he grew older, his father, one of the few who understood him, kept him busy to absorb his erratic behaviour. His father's suicide, coupled with the loss of his eccentric friend and benefactor, the much older Helen Harvey, set in motion a series of events that led to that fateful day at Port Arthur.
There is a great mixture here, that you are born with a genetic legacy, but ultimately it's the environment and what you live in those early years of your childhood that determine whether you're going to express those genes.
He was spending money travelling around the world and trying to make friends. He would buy business class tickets to London or Los Angeles, fly there for sometimes a few hours and then fly back. And what he was doing was people would be forced to sit next to him in a plane at 30,000 feet, and they couldn't get away from him. They had to talk to him. So desperate was he to find people who would befriend him or even have a casual conversation that he would spend $10,000 to have them sitting in a seatbelt next to him so they couldn't escape. And that was where his life had come to.
Having murdered 32 unsuspecting local residents and tourists, the snipers stopped at a bed and breakfast lodge 5 kilometres north of the convict settlement and took 3 hostages, a couple in their 70s and a man who was earlier forced into the boot of a BMW and driven to the guest house.
It's hard to say whether the massacre could have been avoided, but I think it's fairly clear from what I know about Martin Bryant that he had long signs of impending trouble, dating right back to childhood and adolescence certainly, and there were many opportunities that he could have received much more effective help if the appropriate services and expertise had been available.
He actually was trying to find a way to stop himself from killing as he drove down to Port Arthur. One of the fascinating parts of the jigsaw puzzle was why he stopped so many times at so many little villages. He probably stopped half a dozen times.
There's the gunshots.
20 people died during the first terrifying minutes. Some didn't even flee thinking the shots were part of the Sunday afternoon show.
Martin Bryant is not a single case, that this will occur again and again, and that there is an epidemic of adolescent mental health, but the experts themselves don't believe that he's a one-off.